Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato. And today we're going to be providing commentary on this article on how China is beating the United States in the battle for influence over developing countries. And so historically, the reason developing countries are important to major superpowers like the United States and now China is because of their resource wealth. Most countries in the world do not have access to the entirety of the resources they need. In fact, I'm not sure there's any countries that truly have every resource they need, every various mineral, metal, product they need. China's one of the ones that comes closest. Another would be Russia, and another would be the United States. But even then, they have a lot of things like lithium that China gets from, say, places around Africa. And so they need to have these relationships with developing countries. So let's see what China's doing, what the United States is doing. And this is an article in Newsweek. And so it's probably very propagandistic that in a pro-American direction. So for the first time ever, China is beating the United States in the ideological and political battle to win people's favor in developing countries as those lose faith in the world's liberal democracies. And can we really consider them democracies anymore? Because we've seen time and time again that the will of the people does not matter. The majority of Americans at this point want a ceasefire in Israel. What is our government doing? They're providing lethal weaponry to commit a genocide in Gaza instead. So they're doing the complete opposite of what the American people want. The people of Ireland want a reasonable amount of immigration such that they can actually assimilate the people into their populace and have their Irish culture be maintained, which is completely reasonable. And their government is doing the opposite. And this is not even a slight majority. It's actually 2/3. No, it was 3/4 majority of Irish wanted that. And so we see across the Western world that the Western governments, they call themselves democracies, but they're very clearly working for people outside of the majority of the population because they're not listening to the majority of the population, what the majority of the population wants. And that is, for all intents and purposes, the entirety of a democracy. That is what a democracy is supposed to be. Whatever the majority of the people wants, that is what is implemented, and the politicians are supposed to be the implementers of the will of the people. Okay, so let's see what this article says. According to a recent poll by the Center for the Future of Democracy at the University of Cambridge, UK, 62% of people in developing countries are now favorable towards China, while 61% see the United States positively. So I will say this pretty bluntly, which is that the United States has, hands down, the United States and its overlords Israel has hands down the best propaganda apparatus in the world. They have many of the largest media and entertainment organizations completely bought and paid for. And the fact that China is able to sway people despite having a really, really, really bad propaganda apparatus. I mean, we always are told how totalitarian, authoritarian countries have such good propaganda. And really, they just, in this case, it doesn't, even if you consider it authoritarian or whether you consider it authoritarian or not. The United States definitively has the best propaganda system in the world. And if you don't believe that, you are one of the propagandized people. Your brain is soaked in propaganda. Okay, so let's see what else this article says. There's only a small distance between the two countries, and that 1 percentage point difference might not seem so significant, but the data reveals a world that has become more polarized since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in last February this year. Okay, so I think what they're going to show coming up is that the people that are favorable towards China are not the same people that are favorable towards the United States for the most part. That's what I think they're getting at here. So while Western countries stand more firmly behind the United States and have an overwhelming negative view of China and Russia, a great number of countries stretching between Eastern Europe, Asia, and the west of Africa have moved closer to China and Russia in the last 10 years. Okay. And that's the thing. I made sure to talk about this over a decade ago, which was that in some instances, China's going to have an advantage. In other instances, Russia's going to have an advantage for various reasons. Take Central Asia, for example. Russia can provide a lot of cultural similarity, cultural relevance to Central Asian populations because they were, a lot of them, a part of the former Soviet Union. And they can also provide a security apparatus for Central Asian countries to not be overthrown by Western coup attempts. And the Chinese bring economic prosperity to these countries. And so there was a complementary, at its base, security with economics. That's what Russia and China brought to the table. And they're recognizing this, where there are some instances where Russia would be more persuasive for a country, and other instances where China would be more persuasive for a country. This most basic example I like to give is Russia has a very close relationship with India. China has a very close relationship with Pakistan. And so even if India and Pakistan don't get along, and even if Russia doesn't get along with Pakistan or China doesn't get along with India, they could still talk to these other countries through China or through Russia as a mediating force. Okay, so let's see what it says. Okay, so it gives some background on the data that was collected. Okay. All right, so this is important data. So 30 global survey projects that span a total of 137 countries, representing 97% of the world population, shows that among the 1.2 billion living in the world's liberal democracies, 75% hold a negative view of China and 87% hold a negative view of Russia. And that is essentially telling you roughly the amount of people in those countries who are completely propagandized, because there is no reason whatsoever to hold a negative view of China at this point. And I can kind of see a little bit for Russia if you have certain moral beliefs about being the attacker is always bad. So Russia having a special military operation in Ukraine, if you think of that as always bad under any circumstances, which I know some people have that really black and white type of moral compass, then I could see where they're coming from there, and they don't necessarily need to be swayed by propaganda to believe that. That's just their moral compass. I hold a more, what I would say, nuanced view, which is that there are some times where you have to take actions to stop something from happening. And that's what Russia did in that case. So we could say that roughly 3/4 of the Western populace are heavily propagandized to the point where they're willing to believe China is some sort of aggressor that they need to take care of, when China has done absolutely nothing. They just sit within their borders and make things, and people are just like ridiculously propagandized. But anyways, let's move on. The rest of the 6.3 billion people in the world, 70% feel positively towards China and 66% towards Russia. Okay, so there is a very clear breakdown there between countries that are developing, which like Russia and China, and countries that are supposed liberal democracies that don't actually function as a democracy. They're actually oligarchies. They like the United States and hate Russia and China. Okay. So this has been something that's been in the making for 10 years with Russia and China, expanding their influence in developing countries through investments in trade, and it has been exacerbated by the Ukraine war. So it's kind of hilarious here. When you look at loans from Western countries, they have far more stringent requirements compared to Chinese loans. And China often waives those loans at the end of the day too. And they even build things for free just to show off their proficiency and engender goodwill amongst the populace. And so saying that Chinese investments and trade are somehow negative, it's just ridiculous. I mean, when you compare it just objectively, quantitatively, China is definitively a better trade partner than the United States. We have data, verifiable data that shows that it's better than a lot of Western loaning agencies, things like that as well. Okay, so the world is torn between two opposing clusters, a maritime alliance of democracies led by the United States and the Eurasian bloc of illiberal or autocratic states centered upon Russia and China, writes the Center for the Future of Democracy in its report. So why are they gaining support? This article, I wonder if they're able to get into why that's happening, or if it's just going to be propaganda from here on out. So let's see. One of the reasons linked to the increased support in the developing countries is because they are perceived to, China and Russia are perceived to get at the shortcomings of democracies and liberal countries. The majority of the public is dissatisfied with democratic performance in 7 out of 10 countries that are majority favorable to Russia, according to the Center for the Future of Democracy, while most feel positively towards China in 3/4 of countries that are majority dissatisfied with how their democracy is performing. Okay. So let's see what else they have to say here. Economic reasons behind China's support. China launched the Belt and Road Initiative. A lot of people in the world support the Belt and Road Initiative. Okay? I mean, why wouldn't you? They're building different ways to transport goods around the world. And that's exactly what I said China should do over a decade ago, which is if the United States is trying to block you by sea, one, you have to contest them in the South China Sea, but two, you have to have alternative means of trading goods. And so what they did was they came up with the Belt and Road Initiative, which is brilliant. It's exactly what they needed. On the other hand, China has gained approval in developing countries while losing significant support in developed nations. Yeah, there's a Cold War forming. The West is completely propagandized. It's no wonder they've lost support here. They're not doing anything to actually lose that support. They've acted the exact same for decades at this point. Since Deng Xiaoping, they've been going in a very similar trajectory, and Xi Jinping has not really changed that. He's made sure to make his country more resilient to Western sanctions so they don't face another century of humiliation, but they've not taken aggressive steps towards other nations. They're still contesting Taiwan, which they say is a province of China, which international recognition does show that there is a one China policy, and so that makes complete sense, but they've not changed in that regard to Taiwan. So there's nothing really that's occurred that's making it so people are more negative towards China, aside from the propaganda campaign against China. Okay, so Western citizens having a positive view of Russia dropped from 39% to 12% in the past 10 years, and plunged from 23 to 12 only since the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine. Okay, so there's some interesting information there, which is that 16% of that was due entirely to propaganda that occurred before the invasion of Ukraine. So people were getting a more and more negative perception of Russia before they even took the action of halting Ukraine being weaponized against them. Okay, some 75% of respondents in South Asia, 68% in Francophone Africa, 62% in Southeast Asia holds a positive opinion of Russia despite the ongoing war in Ukraine. Okay, one last reason why developing countries might have swayed from the U.S. towards China and Russia are conflicting values. As the U.S. and Western nations have embraced more progressive values in the last decade regarding LGBTQ rights, individualism, and gender equality, other countries have stuck to their traditional conservative values. Yeah, that's the thing where it's like, if something is not working, why would you do more of the same? In the West, they've been doing things in a very progressive direction for decades now, and it's not been working. And so what do? Is they double down on it. Whereas the East Asian collectivistic mentality has worked for millennia, and they're investing more in that and investing in a modernization of their collectivistic types of beliefs, and it's working. They're far more successful. Their people are far happier. They have a higher life expectancy than Americans. I mean, it's ridiculous that America is going in this direction when it's very objectively clear it's not working. Gender relations have broken down between male and female. Divorce rate is at an all-time high. Friendship levels, relationship levels are at all-time lows. People are killing themselves at extremely high levels. People are overdosing, which is another way of killing yourself, at extremely high levels. Over 100,000 deaths to despair per year in America. Something like 50,000 suicides per year in America. I mean, things are objectively bad in America, and they're getting worse the more. I mean, I know it's just correlational. We haven't shown a causal relationship here, but there's from what I've seen in the research, and what you can think of reasonably, there's a ton of reasons to believe that a lot of the progressive values are causing these problems. These progressive values are not rooted in things that make people functioning and happy within a civilization. And so I obviously completely agree with Russia and China here, but let's move on. This has offered an opportunity for authoritarian leaders like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping to present themselves as defenders of traditional values in the face of so-called Western decadence. What more do you need to convince you that it is Western decadence here? So in Putin's case, and protectors of their country's national sovereignty, in Xi's case, new world polarization clearly shows that the nations that feel closer to China and Russia are poorer, less stable, and more dependent upon their external support, while the liberal bloc rallying around the U.S. has significant advantage, accounting for the lion's share of global military spending, foreign aid, and cultural influence. Wow. If that's not a propagandist type of quote. Okay, so the reason these countries that support China and Russia are less stable and poor is because Western countries are in a neo-colonial era where they exploit the populaces of these countries and extract their resources. And they do this all across the world. If there's a country that is anti-Western, they coup that country so that they can't nationalize their national resources, and so they can be exploited by Western corporations. And so it's just ridiculous. The reason these countries are poor and less stable are also the reason these countries support Russia and China, which is that Western hegemony has been very bad for their country. So pretending like it is Russia and China's fault or something like that these countries are poor and less stable is ridiculous. Okay. And I don't think the liberal bloc really has these advantages they talk about here. So yeah, they account for a lot of global military spending, but how's that working for you? How's that working in Israel, where they're having a ton of trouble with some people in flip-flops? How's that working in Ukraine, where Russia is taking on the entire NATO bloc's equipment and training and funding? I mean, in terms of foreign aid, how's that worked for a lot of these developing countries where they're massively in debt and their countries have been taken over or corrupted by non-governmental organizations that are controlled by the intelligence community in the West? And cultural influence, can anyone say that's been a good thing? I mean, look at how horrendous American culture is. So this is a ridiculous article by Newsweek. I just love engaging with and really fighting Western media narratives because it's just all such hot garbage. It's terrible. This stuff is ridiculous. But someone has to talk about it, and someone has to tell you what's wrong with these things. And so hopefully I did that here today. So if you found this video to be informative, please give us a thumbs up. It helps us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble for more content. And tell a friend about our channel. We are trying to grow our channel. We are being suppressed in the algorithm. We used to get 4-digit view counts. Now we're getting single-digit, double-digit view counts. And so it's very clearly suppression that's occurring. We're going to come up with some other ways of getting organic growth, but that's somewhat in the future from the time making this video. We have a lot of things to get caught up on first and a lot of practice that needs to be done. But anyways, if you have a comment, question, concern, please leave that in the comment box below. I do read all of them and I do respond when necessary. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.